Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Matthew Thomas, one of the contributors to the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible. If you missed the first episode, go watch that one first, then come back and check this one out. As always, we would love, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the channel. We are like right around 50,000 subscribers, which is just unbelievable. And we're hoping to continue to grow this ministry and be able to have more guests like Dr. Matthew Thomas here on the channel. So the way that we're able to do all of this is through your support as viewers. And the best way you can show that is by subscribing to the channel and clicking that little notifications bell when you do subscribe. That tells YouTube we want to see more Disciple Dojo, and that's good for us on our end. So it's a win-win situation. Okay, enough of me. Let's get back to our discussion with Dr. Matthew Thomas. What I want to do is you tell readers now, we've done Josephus, why we should be reading Maccabees, and not just why. I mean, you could say why very quickly, but then how should we be reading Maccabees? Because these are books that, especially if they're unfamiliar, they're daunting. There's a lot of names that we don't know. There's people that come in and out. There's sometimes people have the same name, but it's two different people with the same name. So that can be intimidating. Give us that overview, and then after that, we'll jump into the spicy, controversial stuff about purgatory.
Oh yeah, we can definitely go to purgatory. I mean, just at a basic level, the first thing I'd say is don't be intimidated by this stuff. My wife and I, she took a couple of kids to Costco because otherwise they'd be jumping on the bed behind me. But we did these together. We genuinely, because neither of us are from Catholic backgrounds, we didn't come to this with any sort of special insight or anything like that, and so. We're students of this stuff, through and through, and really started, as beginners, when we're doing this. And so I don't think that the content that's here, has to scare you, either from the standpoint of difficulty or from a theological, standpoint. I think even just taking, find it, what's great is I think on Bible Gateway, and the Bible app and stuff, I think that you can find, if you're using one of the Catholic translations, you can just find audio Bibles of this. And so you just put it on when you're, mowing the lawn or doing the dishes or going for a run. And you can get, I think, really, really quickly, a sense of First and Second Maccabees. And because they're covering similar territory, I think it's, pretty easy, I think, to get a starting point as far as what are we actually talking about? Where are we located historically? Why would some of this be significant? And then from a theological standpoint as well, I think the same way that I don't think from an interpretive standpoint that it's hugely difficult or needs to be hugely daunting just to kind of make sense of it. When you're saying, theologically, how do you put the pieces together? First Maccabees especially, I talked about this in the beginning. It's interesting because Luther really likes First Maccabees. When as far as his canonical theory goes, it doesn't work exactly the way that he wants to. And there's certain books like First Maccabees that he just really likes, and he says it's not unworthy of a place among the scriptures. Right. Because for him, as Hebrew narrative, it's doing the same thing that earlier, Hebrew narrative does, and it fills in a lot of stuff so that when you get to Daniel, you think, oh, okay, there's some real correspondence between what you have here in Daniel, and you're going to understand what's happening in Daniel a lot better if you've got Maccabees. So he thinks it's really, really valuable. And he likes it better than Esther. And his canonical theory is such that he's kind of stuck with Esther, and he doesn't get to have First Maccabees. He doesn't seem to be entirely pleased about that, but that's kind of where it goes. So First Maccabees, I think content-wise, if you are somebody who identifies with various Protestant traditions or with Luther, I think the fact that he is as positive with First Maccabees really says something. When it comes to Second Maccabees, I think what's cool from a theological standpoint is even if you don't necessarily, depending on which tradition that you're from, even if you don't necessarily agree with every piece that's there or the things that you might say, hey, I've got questions with this. you can usually find those places pretty easy. Like it's not, it's not like it's really hidden somewhere. Generally speaking, you're gonna the stuff it jumps off the page, and so there's no like, there's no like secret stuff here where you're gonna read this and think, oh no, I couldn't have foreseen that reading this was, it came across this idea and I've, absorbed it somehow by secret osmosis. You recognize it really clearly. And yeah, I think wherever you fall down on, on things like, purgatory, for example, and, the kind of the state of the dead and how it is that our actions can relate to them. It's just really helpful, I think, for getting a sense of, oh, this is where people have come from. And this is why they're coming from there. And so even when it comes to the theology, even if you're somebody who is dead set on being a Protestant and remaining a Protestant forever, which I remember what that felt like. But even if that's where you are, I don't think that there's a danger to reading, something like, first and second Maccabees. I just think it's going to get you some sense of like, oh, that's where they're coming from. And I get that. Yeah. And which I think I think it's where we all want to be.
Well, that's exactly what, for me, that's what the experience was. Reading was like, this is helpful. This is good. And there were places where, I mean, my pages are all yellowed because I've highlighted and made so many notes, but like, oh, that's where that comes. Like, oh, there's the logic behind what's going on.
Can you hold up one of your like yellow pages? I want to see them. Hey, look at that.
So
that's awesome.
Yes, I would make little marginalia notes and highlighting. So yeah, I'm not just blowing smoke, folks. I actually have read Matthew's notes here. Taking down.
Look at that.
Yeah, this page was a good one here. Something on every page. So
that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
I'll show my wife. She'll be stoked. Somebody actually read this stuff.
Let her know, because there. Okay, so let me ask you then, since we're on Second Maccabees, and this is for viewers. If you haven't read this, obviously you'll have to go read the book. Like you'll have to read Maccabees to understand, to follow what we're talking about, and that's part of the goal of this video is to get you to go read it. There's an outline, and actually, since I can do this overhead thing, let me just show you. There's a section you did on the death of Razis.
Yeah. Yep.
And there was a passage in it where this guy basically, and it's wild. Like if you read the story, it's wild. He basically unsuccessfully tries to kill himself a couple of times and then finally pulls his own guts out.
Throws it at people.
Yeah, throwing it at people. Yeah. So, but there's an essay that you wrote in here on the difficulties that raises, because was he a heroic martyr embracing death, or was he suicidal and committing a grievous sin, and for Catholics, a mortal sin? Where do we end up there?
Yep.
Where do you end up there?
Do you want me to answer the question? I didn't know if that was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, no. I want you. I mean, people can read your essay, but just a quick overview. But talk about what. How do we? Let me rephrase the question. Instead of just saying what is your particular view, because I know your view because you present it here,
right?
And you end up saying that it's ambiguous. That ambiguity is part of interpreting biblical narrative.
Yeah.
There are things in the narrative. You mentioned earlier the Witch of Endor, great example. Yeah. Gideon and the fleece, Jephthah's vow, the Akedah, Abraham sacrificing Isaac. There are things we read in narrative, and the question is this go and do thee likewise? Or this is how you shouldn't be doing, but this shows the state of things, and we're just giving it to you. Like the later chapters of Judges, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. This is one of the areas where I think, again, thank God, when you have, when you have Catholics and you have Protestants who, both really actively believe the faith. This is one of the areas where, I mean, we just, we're peas in a pod together. We're doing the same stuff, which I think is fantastic, because what we're trying to do ultimately is to read the text really closely and to not just sort of give a quick sort of like surface level reading and think, okay, that's great, I'm going to move on from here to something that's more important, but to recognize that what God is doing and what he gives us here has a unique authority to it. And because of that, and because of the way that he's revealed himself distinctly through these texts, we don't just want to pass by quickly. We want to actually really spend time to look at the details. And you see that, if you just to take some of the examples that you're looking at, if you look at Abraham, and you're looking at the Akedah, and you think, gosh, this is such an interesting story. Like, what is Abraham doing? What's he thinking at this point? And the more that you read the text and the more that you look at the details, there's certain things that you see where it's like, it seems like Abraham knows somehow that something is going to happen here. And so, like, for instance, like the way he tells the servants, hey, we're going to go up and sacrifice, and then we will return to you. We will return to you. He hears God's words clearly. He doesn't mistake him for saying what he says, but he still believes we will return to you. Now, how is it going to happen from Abraham's standpoint? Well, it doesn't not made explicit, and I don't know if Abraham knows how that's going to work. But he has faith that somehow God's promises, as far as what he's going to do through Isaac, are still going to be true, even if he's given this command to offer up his son. I think it's really, really interesting. And so too, I think here, when you're looking at, a passage like this, the death of Razis, it's basically trying to take, that same posture towards the text and to apply it here. And so you have this figure who, as you mentioned, dies, and again, could be good to make a movie out of. It would not be a movie for children. But this
is not going to be in the Action Bible, right?
Yeah, I don't think that they had I don't think they had a page on this particular scene of throwing his entrails at his enemies.
I need to come up with one then and do it a Disciple Dojo Action Bible supplement.
Yeah,
I'll put my art degree to use and draw this scene.
That'd be fantastic. I love it. I think that what we've tried to do in this section here is to look at the circumstances and to look at the close the details of the text, and then also to take seriously the early interpretation of the text as well, and how the early readers looked at this figure, because it's one of those figures where there's just real ambiguity, in the sense that you have somebody who does seem as though they're about to be killed, and so you're in a context of war. It seems as though they're his enemies are going to kill him, and when they kill him, they're probably going to do very bad things soon. And so because of that, you can say this figure seems to be as good as dead. And so would you then call it a suicide? Probably not. Does that mean that what he does is the model that should be given for the readers? Is this, should we then go and do likewise? Well, there's a lot of hints in the text that that's probably not the way this works, because you have earlier figures, and especially those in 2 Maccabees 6 and 7. So Eleazar is this aged old man who's also going to die. Antiochus says, hey, if you don't eat pork, you're going to die. And he says, I'm not going to eat pork. I'm sorry. He says, okay, well, you're going to die instead. And I guess Eleazar probably could have, sliced himself open and throw all his entrails at Antiochus. And he doesn't do that. He says, I'm going to die in my integrity. And so he sets this example for nonviolent martyrdom, which is itself so powerful that it makes it so that, and our author here praises Eleazar to high heaven. It then goes and inspires in 2 Maccabees 7. It's the prelude to the mother and her 7 sons, who are these 7 brothers who will all suffer martyrdom in the same way as Eleazar did, in this sort of non-violent way. Again, not what Razis does. And then the mother as well. And then what's interesting is it's not just that these are good examples. At the end of that chapter, so the end of 2 Maccabees 7, one of the last brothers says that by their sacrifice, they're going to turn away God's wrath from Israel, because of the merit of what it is that they're doing, that they're willingly giving up their lives for God and for his law. And what you see from a narrative standpoint is that's exactly what happens, because 2 Maccabees 8, you turn the next page, and it's God raising up Judas to be the one who is going to set everything straight, because the wrath of God has now been turned away from Israel. And so the whole rest of the story follows from this example of martyrdom, of this faithful, nonviolent, way of, basically giving one's life for God, which ends up being so powerful and making such an impact. It really is. It's the hinge of the whole story of Second Maccabees. And Razis, though he's valued as somebody who's fighting for Israel and stuff, he isn't praised in the same kind of way, nor do his actions leave any sort of lasting impact, besides everybody just sort of saying ooh and having a funny look on their face.
We gotta
come to the end of it.
We gotta, because we've been talking about it. I know I told readers to go read it, but we got to pull it up and because it's short enough, but it is wild. And this is what we're talking about. Again, I like this format of you giving background and us chatting about it. And now if they've never seen it, they can take a look. This is in 2 Maccabees 14, verse 41. I'll just read it real quick. When the troops were about to capture the tower and were forcing the door of the courtyard, they ordered that fire be brought and the doors be burned. Being surrounded, Razis fell upon his own sword, preferring to die nobly rather than fall into the hands of sinners and suffer outrages unworthy of his noble birth. So this is a little ambiguous, because the others seem to be caring more about God's laws and faithfulness, and he's kind of like, I'm a noble. But in the heat of the struggle, he did not hit exactly. So he fell on his sword, but he didn't do it right. And the crowd was now rushing in through the doors. He courageously ran up on the wall and bravely threw himself down into the crowd. But as they quickly drew back, a space opened and he fell in the middle of the empty space. Still alive and aflame with anger, he rose, and though his blood gushed forth and his wounds were severe, he ran through the crowd, and standing upon a steep rock, with his blood now completely drained from him, he tore out his entrails, took them in both hands, and hurled them at the crowd, calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to give them back to him again, which we will talk about in just a second. This was the manner of his death. So that's the story that we're talking about, the account. And there are, like you talked about, ambiguity there. It's ambiguous because he says, it says things like, and bravely threw himself down, courageously ran up the stairs. Like, there are hints of it, but then there's also, outrages worthy of his noble birth. And then at the end, just, this was the manner of his death. Like, there you go.
Yeah. Which is great if you contrast that again with the deaths of these earlier figures. It's pretty clear who it is that our author is intending to commend for us as examples. So it's really, really helpful.
Well, readers can wrestle with that on their own. I want to talk about the thing that I just mentioned at the very end is calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to give them. So he pulls his guts out, he pulls his entrails out and throws them at the crowd. And it says, calling upon the Lord and spirit, Lord of life and spirit, to give them back to him again. So that's obviously talking about, that's a big theme. The martyrs, as they're dying, they are encouraged that they will, the tongues that are being cut out, they'll get them back.
Yeah.
What does that mean in Maccabees?
Yeah. So we've got this essay on resurrection in the Old Testament in this. So in 2 Maccabees 7, and it's really interesting. I think I might have mentioned this before in our previous episode, but. You open up 2 Maccabees 7, and you might suspect that you accidentally open up to the New Testament rather than the Old Testament. because of how frequently and how explicitly it's talking about resurrection. And so you have that not just as an element that's here, but as what's really the basis of the whole narrative, particularly in this central hin section of chapters 6 and 7. What is it that gives these faithful Jews? What is it that gives them the confidence to be able to voluntarily give up their lives, to be able to be faithful, to God's law? And it is the hope of the resurrection, and it's because of the hope of the resurrection that they then are able to suffer, and that through their suffering, and through, again, the value that is in that, that the wrath of God actually does end up being turned away from the people, and that there's, in a sense, a redemption that takes place. And it all hinges on, it all has it as its foundation, the resurrection. So what I've done, that the particular essay that you had open there, resurrection. It's called Resurrection in the Old Testament, and I give a brief overview of the idea of resurrection in the Old Testament, looking at the hints that you have elsewhere. So on the one hand, there is, there's often places you're going to read in the Old Testament, there's no clear concept of an afterlife, or whatever it is, seems very vague. So being added to their fathers, what does that mean exactly? The text usually doesn't elaborate a whole lot. There are places where you seem to get more than just that. And so, Enoch walks with God. Elijah's taken up, and, he's ostensibly, he doesn't just sort of burn up in the atmosphere when the chariot goes and takes him. He seems to go up to actually, be with God, and would seem to be a kind of continued existence. You have a number of examples like that. So in Ezekiel, Daniel, and Isaiah, even in Job, there's passages which seem to either hint at, or in some cases even explicitly, as a Daniel, to talk about some kind of future life. And as you go on within the biblical narrative, this is something that you can see does seem to become more explicit. And so one of the things that I use for this is what seems to be the underlying debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees on the pages of the New Testament, because it seems as though the Sadducees just hold into the first 5 books of the Old Testament, so just to the Pentateuch, don't take that as a sufficient evidentiary basis to go and to demonstrate the resurrection. And the Pharisees disagree with that assessment, and also think they should have more books too. And so if you actually have Isaiah, if you actually have Ezekiel and Daniel, then this is really clear. It's interesting reading later rabbinic texts. There's a great one where it says, here, this is Pharisee inspired. They're talking about who doesn't participate in the resurrection. And the only people who don't get resurrected, according to this rabbinic text, are those who deny that the resurrection can be demonstrated from the first 5 books of Moses, which is really interesting. So the Sadducee, you don't get resurrected. If you're denying that the resurrection can be demonstrated from the 5 books of Moses, then you get no resurrection. Everybody else is pretty much in. You can see Jesus then, when he's entering into that debate, he doesn't respond to the text from Isaiah, or anywhere else. He responds with a text from Exodus, which is kind of the brilliant move, and why everybody's astonished, because it seems as though he's proved the resurrection from just the Pentateuch. It says, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." He's not the God of the dead; he's the God of the living. And everyone's like, that's a really good answer. So you can see how even among Jews, that little bit there, in which you get later on, with Paul, when he goes back to Jerusalem, they're having a big food fight in the Sanhedrin, as far as the resurrection, does it exist, does it not exist? You can see how in the Old Testament, depending on where you prioritize your reading and the way that you interpret the text, there's absolutely something that's here, but what does it actually look like? And it's its fullest detail. Second Maccabees has the fullest expression of that hope for the resurrection within the Old Testament, which is I think it's fair to say, still not yet really clear and explicit until you have the resurrection actually take place as a historical event with Christ himself. So that's not what I do there. I throw in talking about stegosauruses and stuff.
Yeah, there's a mention of stegosaurus in there. That's just to whet the reader's appetite.
If anybody says dinosaurs aren't in the Bible, they're wrong. They just got the wrong one. We got dinosaurs, got even stegies.
Dinosaurs aren't in the Bible, but they are in the notes to the Catholic Study Bible by Ignatius.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you use the example, you use an analogy, and if somebody said, "What's a dinosaur?" and you said it's a stegosaurus, like that would not clarify, that wouldn't answer their question. They would have to have some understanding. You explain something new by something that's already familiar.
Yeah.
And so you talk about that with resurrection, and yeah, folks, definitely go read that essay because it's really good.
Just to fill it in, so it's Ezekiel with the valley of dry bones, and so in Ezekiel 37, and so the idea is what's happening is that, a lot of scholars will say that you have these dry bones, they're being put back together there, and then they're being brought to life again, and that this is an analogy for the national reconstitution that's going to take place. And I think that as far as it goes, that I think it can function as an analogy. But the way that an analogy works is that you're using something that's familiar to describe something that's unfamiliar. And so because of that, it doesn't really work to say that the Jews of this time had no conception of resurrection or no conception of life after death. Because if so, they would be taking, an unfamiliar thing, so national reconstitution, and explaining that by an even more unfamiliar thing, which is the resurrection. It only works as an analogy if it has some sense of what resurrection is. Otherwise, we'd be like answering the question of what's a dinosaur by saying it's like a stegosaurus.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work as an analogy.
Yeah. I'm disappointed that you went with Stegosaurus and not Ankylosaurus, which is the best dinosaur scientifically. But, Protestant, Catholic, we're going to have disagreements. So there you go.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I think we really hit on the main issue of the divide between, Protestants and Catholics.
That's really going to throw down about which dinosaur is the best.
Yeah. If you could put that on the thumbnail.
Yes.
Which dinosaur is actually the best and have a stegosaurus versus an ankylosaurus?
Catholic versus Protestant.
I think it's going to get the hits.
Let's segue. While we're talking about Catholic versus Protestant, you also had an essay at the end of Second Maccabees, near the end, and I'll put it up on screen so folks can see it. This one right here. And so you open with this line, and I think it's a very insightful line. You say, if one were to ask the question why Protestant Bibles are shorter than Catholic ones, a quick and easy answer would be 2 Maccabees 12. So then you go on to talk about why that is. Unpack that thought for us a little bit. What did you mean? I mean, talk about like a exciting opener, like that's going to want to make people read more. So what's going on?
Yeah, well, let's put ourselves, in the context of, the 16th century. This is part of what I try to do in this particular essay, and try to
wait. Actually, let me pause. Let's put this on the screen so that this one I want to see. This one viewers need to know beforehand. I think it'll help them with their context. So it's 2 Maccabees 12, and which is near the end. Yep.
Yeah. So. You can start at 39 if you want to. You can start a little bit.
There we go. Yeah. So this is. Let me read it real quick, and then you can tell us why this you think is the pinnacle, the pivotal reason for Second Maccabees. So it says, on the next day, as had now become necessary, Judas, and this is Judas Maccabeus, and his men went to take up the bodies of the fallen and bring them back to lie with their kindred in the sepulchres of their ancestors. I'm reading from the NRSV, by the way. Then under the tunic of each one of the dead, they found sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids Jews to wear. And it became clear to all that this was the reason these men had fallen. So they died in battle. When they're searching the bodies, it turned out they had pagan amulets on. So they were syncretists. So Judas and his men, they blessed all the ways of the Lord, the righteous judge who reveals the things that are hidden. And they turned to supplication, praying that the sin that had been committed might be wholly blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened as the result of the sin of those who had fallen. He also took up a collection, man by man, to the amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver, and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. In doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. So that you have a rare narrator. You don't have to guess what the narrator's view of this action is. He straight up tells you. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he was looking to the splendid reward that is laid up for those who fall asleep in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Therefore he made atonement for the dead, so that they might be delivered from their sin. So this is purgatory in a nutshell. I mean, the concept of purgatory is something happening, and after death, sin being atoned for or being purged, so that someone can enter into eternal life. So why is this such a monumental text?
Yeah. So, what I try to do in the in this essay is I try to kind of recreate some of Luther's own context, because if you think in, what's the, where does Luther's original, what are his original protests to? And this is something where I do a lot of writing on the doctrine of justification and stuff. And it's interesting because if you think about it, his original stuff isn't even about justification. It's not even necessarily even about like purgatory. His big issue is with indulgences.
Right.
He sees the abuse of indulgences. The abuse of indulgences is what makes him think, gosh, this purgatory stuff, what's going on with this?
And real quick, sorry to interrupt, but indulgences, again, because we have viewers that are all over the spectrum in terms of their knowledge of this. Indulgences are the equivalent of that, taking money and sending it on behalf of the dead for a sin offering, which happens in Second Maccabees. Indulgences was a later practice that by the time of Luther, people like Tetzel would go around and basically say, hey, every time you put money in the coffer, your loved ones get out of purgatory 10,000 years sooner than they otherwise would have, or 1,000,000 years sooner, or, this whole schema that had developed, that Luther looked at that and said, this is nonsense. The idea of you are paying, the church is raising money off the goodwill of people who are giving money, poor people giving money in hopes that, their beloved mother won't have to spend time in purgatory. All of that built upon this passage, really.
Yeah. So when the coin in the coffer clings, the soul from purgatory springs is, I think, the way that we translate that into English, which has a really nice rhyme to it. You can see how that would work well. Thanks, Johann Tetzel. So what I try to go back to is I try to recreate this context, because I think it's really helpful to get, and again, also being from a Protestant background. I don't have to do like a whole lot of imagining. I kind of you sort of grow up with these sorts of things. Pretty easy to get a sense of why Luther was uncomfortable with indulgences. And one of the things that I frankly didn't know growing up at all is how uncomfortable Catholics were about indulgences in this period as well, and the abuses that you have with respect to indulgences. And so, what's interesting is what you end up getting with the Council of Trent, which is a fairly radical move in some ways. It makes it so that the kinds of indulgences that were being sold, which are themselves modeled on what you have here in 2 Maccabees 12, so you are giving money so that to pay for sacrifices. That kind of indulgence, I think at this point, history in the 16th century, there was a recognition that the abuses around this had gotten so bad that they just said, we're disallowing this altogether. So it's just isn't getting rid of indulgences, because you can still say, I'm going to pray for this person. I'm going to, I don't know, let's say you're going to go on a pilgrimage or something like that. You're going to, whatever happens to be. There's still indulgences related to that, but you saying we can't have indulgences have any sort of relation to anything financial anymore. Right. And so Judas, etc. They might not have had this issue at that point, but here in the 16th century, it's gotten so bad that the Council of Trent just says we're just putting a permanent moratorium on anything like that because of the way that it can be abused. So that itself, there is a kind of vindication of Luther's objections, and again, not just Luther's. I mean, if you take Zwingli, for example, Zwingli himself was also preaching against indulgences as a Catholic priest with the blessing of his Catholic bishop, saying, if you could preach against these, the abuse of this stuff, that'd be great, because you have this folk theology that's going around. And I mean, I think you do, I appreciate what you just do in general with showing often the folk theology that can replace Christianity in our heads, right, and how important it is to actually go back to the text and to see that this is what Scripture actually says, rather than just letting sort of vague, ideas or sort of take over in your head. So you have Catholics, Protestants, et cetera, everybody kind of recognizing, hey, there's issues that are here. There's abuses, and so what's going to be the best way to deal with these abuses? What you see with Luther, and what's distinctive in his debates as he's kind of going on, it goes from indulgences to purgatory, and then purgatory to justification with all these things. And then what ends up ultimately being, for him, and I think this is at Leipzig, if I remember correctly, in 1519, when he's debating with Johann Eck, he ends up saying, okay, well, these other, these books, which we now call Deutero-canonicals, that term isn't used in that way at that time. And so because of that, it's not the best term to make use of. These books don't have a authority to them like the authentic scriptures. And so because of that, what does that end up doing? Well, if the primary passage that purgatory was based on was 2 Maccabees 12, well, guess what? We just got rid of purgatory. It doesn't have any biblical basis anymore. And if purgatory doesn't have biblical basis, well, then these indulgences, you don't have to worry about them either. It just doesn't matter. So we solve the problem. It's interesting because even when you spend time with Luther, he's transparent that for him it's not that he doesn't still believe that there might be a purgatory. He's open that, I think that you can say that, which is one of the surprising areas. You read him on purgatory, like, that's not what I thought. You thought. What's interesting is, and I think what's significant, from a broader standpoint, is that what he wants to say is that the evidentiary basis for it is not strong enough that it should be a matter of faith. And if it's not a matter of faith, then indulgences, there's no reason that we should be practicing these kinds of things. Mm. So there's points of contact, obviously, between, what Luther is saying and even what the Council of Trent ends up doing. The difference is when it comes to the solution proposed by Luther, whether that is the correct and appropriate solution to the abuses that he and others were recognizing were real abuses and real problems. And from a Catholic standpoint, the answer is a big no, because of the way that both the practice of praying for the dead, the understanding of purgatory as a reality, but also just the books themselves, the authority that these books carried within the Christian tradition up to that point is such that to say, hey, we're just kind of get rid of those and not have to worry about it anymore. That itself would be such a deviation from I guess you could say almost the Catholic principle as to holding to what had been universally believed in practice, that it would be itself to almost change the church into something else. It would be that it wouldn't just sort of be a kind of a reforming. It would be a revolution of sorts. And that isn't to say, is saying that the reception of these books, isn't variegated. And that's one of the things, we talked before about the essay on the canon of scripture, and which you have reflected some here as well. And one of the things that I've really tried to do is to show how within the early centuries of the church, and even going through the medieval period, how you do have a variegated reception of these books that we now call Deutero-canonical, which Second Maccabees is one. It's not completely uniform. You have figures like Jerome, who seem to be against them, and then even he's variegated, where you think he's against him, and then he's still quoting them all over the place as if they're real authorities. And so it's not as though it's all easy and simple. Having said that, the Catholic and Orthodox tradition, as kind of going back to the beginning and the way that this ends up all working out, ends up being to take these books as inspired and as authorities. And so because of that, that doesn't give the church the option to just say, okay, we're going to take these books out because this practice ends up being abused. The solution that the Council of Trent has, which I appreciate how seriously the Council of Trent takes this, is to say, what this book is still inspired. However, from a standpoint of practical discipline, there are so many abuses that are going on with this right now that we need to say, we're just going to, if you have money, that's fantastic. Do something good with it. But it's not going to be used in the way that Judas is using it here in 2 Maccabees 12. There's sufficient abuses that we need to put a permanent, moratorium on this. And so you can see it. I think it helps to get a sense of why you have different canons of scripture between kind of Protestants and then kind of Orthodox and Catholics on the other side. Why something like this would be so significant. I think also how it is that there really ends up being more, I guess you could say, almost commonality between even something that, I remember growing up thinking, like, you're being told that the Council of Trent is really, really bad. And, if you're a Catholic after the Council of Trent and you didn't become a Protestant, then like you go to hell because the Council of Trent is bad. But you actually read what it says, you're like, it's identifying the same problems that, Luther is identifying and calling them out as problems, and also giving like real, in some ways, pretty radical solutions, saying, hey, even though 2 Maccabees 12 says this, we're putting the brakes on it, and the brakes have stayed on, since then, because, of the potential for abuse that, that you have with something like this. So, well,
it comes, yes, it's one, I, as a Protestant, never was raised that anybody Catholic after Trent is going to hell, but I was never raised anti-Catholic. This is an important distinction. The Protestant, again, I was raised within the Wesleyan tradition, which is the broadly Anglican, going back, and the church family tree roots get kind of tangled as you go. But to me, it was I've never looked at Catholics as non-Christian. I've just looked at them as in a different room of the house, and I've looked at them as many would probably say, I'm not a Christian, but that's Orthodox, runs into the same thing. It doesn't, to me, it comes down, I think whether you're Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox, I think it comes down when you read Second Maccabees 12, is this prescriptive? Is this descriptive? Is Judas being praised for doing something that in his mind at the time was that the motive was good, even if what he did wasn't actually effectual at a metaphysical level or a justification level, but his motive and his commitment to the idea of resurrection was so strong that they were willing to, like, I don't even know if I should do this, but there's nothing that says I can't, so I'm doing, like that. To me, where it comes down to, like, you can read it that way. You can still consider Second Maccabees scripture and not come away with exactly what Tetzel and others were doing by the time of Luther, which is, they were doing the prosperity gospel version of this, of Second Maccabees.
Yeah.
Do you know of, do Orthodox, does the Orthodox Church, have the same doctrine of purgatory as Catholic?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The Orthodox views on purgatory tend to be less defined. And so one of the things that I guess you could say, on the one hand, the idea that that our prayers for the dead are efficacious, in some ways you're going to get that even more in an Orthodox church than you are in a Catholic one, because I would say in a contemporary Orthodox service, the communion of the saints is something that I think that in the Orthodox service I've been to, which is a limited, experience base. But within that base, I would say there's a higher emphasis on that communion of the saints than you have within probably most modern Catholic services. And so because of that, the fact that, just the sense that you are living in the same, the same church, that, St. John Chrysostom is, in a sense, he's here with us right now. And we're going to ask him to pray for us. We're not going to pray for him because he's a saint, but he doesn't have the same needs that we do. But the sense of that time and space are porous because of what God has done in Christ and uniting all of us. You probably get that a little bit more deeply within an Orthodox service, at least in my limited experience. What you get a little bit differently is, and this is where you can have Orthodox and Catholics, at least historically, kind of arguing back and forth some, is the specificity of purgatory. And so how does this work exactly? Does this work as a place? Does it work as a process? And you can have Catholic theologians in medieval period, for example, who can be talking about purgatory with greater specificity than Orthodox will, or than Orthodox will want to. You can see, some of the sources I really like with this, and the new edition of McGrath's Christian Theology. This is one of the areas that we did some expansions for in this one, which was really fun. And so some of what I brought out some of C.S. Lewis's stuff on purgatory, and some of what he finds to be, more helpful and less helpful. And so he finds Dante and John Henry Newman to be really helpful. You find some of the, late medieval stuff that you get in that middle period to be somewhat less helpful. And then I pull out, there's I don't know if you would have ever come across this, but Pope Benedict XVI has this encyclical that he wrote called Spe Salvi, so Saved in Hope. And in it, he has this great section towards the end where it's talking about purgatory and some of the recent conceptions that theologians have had of it, where, some folks talking about it as, the encounter just with Christ, and the encounter with the fire of his love, and how the fire of Christ's love is itself what burns away any remaining impurities that we have, which is, of course, not like necessarily fun in the sense of most fire isn't isn't really fun to experience, but which is nevertheless, a true encounter with Christ and a true encounter, with His love and a natural function of His love and setting us free from, the sins that have made us impure and have weighed us down. There's a great bit from N.T. Wright. He wrote this little review of this encyclical a number of years ago, and he's got a great line. He says, if a German pope had been speaking this clearly about these things in, I don't know, say 1517, the whole history of Western Christendom would have been very different. And so it's a great. I mean, I love what Tom says there, and I think it's really, really great constructive stuff. So if anybody's interested in looking at how this looks kind of theologically today, both Protestant Catholic, but then also Protestant Catholic Orthodox, and some of the the areas where you have discussion, I'd highly recommend Space Salvi. I think it's really good, which is I think it's part of it's significant because it's written both, as a Catholic standpoint, both with Protestants and with Orthodox in view, and trying to have as much common ground as possible.
Do me a favor and send me, when we're done, send me a link to, if you have a link to it, or at least the title.
Oh, yeah. It's just online. I'll
send me the link and I'll put it in the video description below so that people can go there, because I look at these kind of discussions as they're important, and many people like in YouTube comment land, people come at Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant disagreements antagonistically often.
Yeah.
Instead, and I'm not again. I mean, Disciple Dojo, we're about sparring. I don't mind the sparring, but to me, it's important first to find the commonalities and to find where are we disagreeing in good faith, and where are we just saying something similar but in a different way? Yeah. Because certainly not all, but a lot of the disagreements, I think, are of that nature. Yeah. I mean, even the idea of purgatory, like Protestant, biblically grounded Protestants, we believe that, like in Corinthians, it talks about he will, somebody's works, they will survive, and he himself will be spared. His works will be burned up, but he will be spared, but only as one who has come through the fire. Or Second Peter's, talking about the God's fiery judgment will lay everything bare, will reveal everything. And so the concept is one that I think any Protestant could recognize, at least the concept of there still is going to be a revealing, a purging of, whatever somebody died with, and their works, their life, their judgment. It's just Protestants put that all as part of the final judgment. And Orthodox and especially Catholic have it happening between now and final judgment through that process of purgatory. I think that's, if you can look at it that way, as like, okay, so that our disagreement really is more of, like you said, how specific is it? How much of it is revealed versus how much of it is just left unrevealed? How much is people filling in the blanks? We here at Disciple Dojo, we have a podcast series. Probably the first thing we ever put online, like over 10 years ago, Apocalypse Now, what the Bible teaches about the end times. And the final session of that, it's a 10-part podcast. The final session is personal eschatology. What happens when you die? And that's where we look at, so viewers, if you're interested, like if you want to know what would a Protestant, and we use a lot of N.T. Wright. In fact, N.T. Wright was the so-called textbook that we used for teaching that course, was his Surprised by Hope. But if you want to know, what does a general Protestant approach, not a fundamentalist approach, not a dispensational left behind approach, but just an overall Protestant Christian approach, check that episode out and you'll get that. If you want to see how that differs from a Catholic approach, by all means, read Benedict's encyclical and do it. Like, I think you should. I think I'm going to read it when you share the link with me.
Oh, it's killer. It's so good. And just to say as well that, I mean, as far as N.T. Wright goes, I mean, I'm going to find his stuff to be so helpful.
Did he respond to it online or was it in print?
Yeah, it was in print, but the response is online as well. And
Okay,
so I can
send me both of those
send
when
that
we're
to you too.
done, and I'll be sure to link
Yeah,
so that
yeah,
we want people. That's part of why I like having Matt here on the channel, viewers, is so that you're getting a wider array. You're getting a different view. You're getting exposed to different things. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Read the Apocrypha or Deutero-canonical, whatever you want to label it. Read it. Read those books. And I do recommend, I recommend reading it in the Ignatius because you get Matthew and his wife's study. Leanne, is that her name?
yeah. You got it.
Yeah, you get Matthew and Leanne's study notes to it. And it helps you. It really helped me walk through the text of Second Maccabees. And one thing I'll commend your notes on, there's a lot of times, and I've reviewed over 100 study Bibles now, there are a lot of times when you're reading through a passage and you're like, wait a minute, I have a question about this. And you go down to the study notes and they don't even mention it. That happened very few times in Second Maccabees. Most of the times when I was reading and said, wait a minute, I have a question. Which is this the same so and so as in previous? And I go down to the notes and it says, this is probably a different, so and so. And this is where they're referred to. Like the notes in it, you guys did a great job of doing what study notes should do, which is answering the questions that would naturally arise from the text. So, folks, I mean, there are other study Bibles with notes to the Apocrypha. I wouldn't recommend any of them, honestly, except the CEB Study Bible. I think that does a pretty good job. But the other Catholic versions, didn't super helpful. One doesn't even have notes to the Apocrypha books. They just give you the text with no notes, which I don't think is helpful. So, yeah, this is a great resource. I mean, Ignatius, I've been recommending this to other Protestants and being like, guys, this is a good resource. Like you should put it up there. I look at it like the ESV Study Bible. I don't come from the same tradition as the ESV Study Bible. So there are times where I'm going to disagree, but it's still a helpful study Bible. And that's a pretty high standard. And if you're in that tradition, Calvinist, Complementarian, Reformed, Baptist, if that's your crowd, then you're going to love it and not have any problems with it. But even if that's not your crowd.
I think you like this one more. The ESV Study Bible didn't get 5 videos. So.
This one is more unique than the ESV Study Bible for sure, because it has more. I'm more familiar with the ESV Study Bible just coming up in evangelical Protestantism, so it's not as it's not as unique. This is unique because there aren't other Catholic study Bibles that are doing what this does. Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to. And also because I'm not going to lie, like the reviews of that study Bible get 10,000, 15,000 views. Reviews of my other study Bibles get maybe 5, maybe 2. So there's a lot of Catholics out there, or there's a lot of people that are interested in it. And that is part of it. Yeah. I think it's a good thing. I think it speaks to the quality of the work. Honestly.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I appreciate your kind words as well. I mean, a lot of this credit to my wife as far as, and it helps having 2 folks go through this and really working together because, we went through for all of this and we had no idea what we were doing, but we really wanted to take it seriously and try to do the best job that we could. And so that's one of the things that, in our own experiences, like I would go through and kind of have a sense of and say like, hey, here's all the spots I think that we should have notes. She would go through with a list as well. Yeah. And say all the places that she thought that we had notes. And then we would compare the list and then just talk about it and go through all of them together. This is usually once we put our kids to sleep. And we'd say, yeah, what do you think about this one? Do we need this? Do we already say this over here? And I mean, so much of just the precision as far as the details goes.
Yeah. It was a committee. You guys were a committee of 2. That's what other committees and study Bibles do is they come together, they compare their notes, they hash it out, and I think that makes it stronger. So the fact that it was you and your wife doing it, that's no less of a committee of biblical scholars. You just happen to also be one flesh.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's incredible. And the way that she's able to just, find things, or she just I might take something for granted and she'd be like, I don't think that somebody's gonna know what this is. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're totally right. Like
Mm.
nobody's gonna know what that is. So yeah, she added a lot of the practical wisdom, I think, to it as well.
Well, you guys did a great job with it. And aside from the study Bible aspect of it, the Maccabean literature for viewers that are watching, people like myself or David De Silva, not Catholic, not Orthodox, we're Protestant, but would say this literature is absolutely crucial. And all of the lessons that you get from the book, I think are still valid. I think even if you don't end up being like, yes, like I read the account, I read chapter 12 and I'm like, okay, I don't believe in the doctrine of purgatory. I'm not Catholic. And I don't even know to what degree any of what Judas did was efficacious, but I can see in the narrative the narrator is trying to get across he was trying to honor God and trying to recognize, call out, and atone for the sins of his countrymen. And because he recognized that there is such a thing as throughout the Old Testament, there's collective guilt, there's collective impurity in the camp, and a situation like Achan, for example, in Joshua, there were instances like that enough to say, hey, it's not just enough for me to be right with God. We as a people need to be right with God. And that motivated, I think, Judas. I think that motivated the Pharisees in Jesus's day. I think it got twisted. It got warped into an unhealthy place. But it doesn't mean that the core concept is wrong. And so that's the way I look at it. I mean, viewers, if
Yeah.
yes, I, as a Protestant, I can't go as far as Matthew could probably comfortably go with the doctrine of purgatory, but
Yeah.
I could go along with saying what Judas did is praiseworthy,
Yeah.
even if we part ways on if it's efficaciousness.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this divisive thing.
Yeah. Well, I think like in most things in life, my aspiration is just to arrive at C.S. Lewis. And so if we can kind of coalesce around, kind of, what Lewis, held to on this. I was probably, as a Protestant, I was probably a weird Protestant just because I was such, Lewis is the biggest theological influence on me. And so because of what Lewis, believes about purgatory, I kind of looked at him like, yeah, I think that makes sense. I think I believe in purgatory as well.
Yeah.
And so even before I was Catholic, I that was one of those where I think Lewis kind of won me over. One other connection I think is just interesting too, just to go back to Josephus.
Hmm.
You find so much surprising stuff in here. So we're talking about Abraham and Isaac earlier, and this is one of the, I think, one of the most fascinating passages that you have in Josephus, where Josephus is giving you his reading of what's happening with Abraham and Isaac. And it's interesting because they get at Mount Moriah and they're basically having a philosophical discourse, which of course one does. And it's really interesting the way in which Josephus seems to, as part of this discourse, it seems as though the conversations back and forth, it's presupposing this idea of the communion of the saints. And so this is in book 1, chapter 13. Yeah, Antiquities, book 1, and this is going to be this is well, if you go to 230. So if you read 230 and 231, it's really interesting because you see this and you think, this is it. It reminds you of the way that you have communion of the saints in Second Maccabees. So in Second Maccabees, you have it obviously in 12, where you have those who are who are still alive praying for those who are dead. But you also have in Second Maccabees 15, you have Jeremiah show up along with the high priest Onias, neither of whom are currently living. But Judas has this dream where it's this kind of vision, and he sees Onias and Jeremiah, so Jeremiah the prophet, praying for the people. And this is sort of the thing that goes and inspires this great last battle, is the recognition that those who have departed, that they're still interceding for us, which of course in Jeremiah, that's a big deal when Jeremiah is praying for you, because like Jeremiah's prayers are so powerful that God has to tell Jeremiah, hey, Jeremiah, stop praying for these people. Judgment's supposed to come upon them, and you won't stop praying for them because when you're so righteous, it's hard for me not to listen to you. So don't pray for these people anymore. It's kind of like one of the only instances you get in Scripture of God telling somebody to not pray, to not intercede. Yeah. And so you have Jeremiah continuing to intercede, for the people, which ends up, it ends up being sort of the inspiration for what takes place in this last battle. And so, sorry, I think it's book 1. I think it's on, looks like it's 2 there. You've got. Yeah. There you go.
Antiquity is 130.
1, and then I think you went 230.
1, 230. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, sorry. A lot of numbers there.
1, 230. Gotcha.
And so if you read 1, 230, and then 231, this is Abraham speaking to Isaac. And then so 230 is kind of the lead up. And then 231 is the one where it's really interesting. We think, well, something is going on here. It's really fascinating. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. I'll read 230 and 231 real quick. This says, accordingly, thou, my son, wilt now die, not in any common way of going out of the world, but sent to God, the Father of all men, beforehand by thy own father in the nature of a sacrifice. So this is Abraham talking to his son. I suppose he thinks thee worthy to get clear of this world, neither by disease, neither by war, nor by any other severe way by which death usually comes upon men, but so that he will receive thy soul with prayers and holy offices of religion, and will place thee near to himself. And thou wilt there be to me a succorer and supporter in my old age, on which account I principally brought thee up, and thou wilt thereby procure me God for my comfort instead of thyself.
Old English doesn't help too much. So on mine, I can just reread it.
Yeah, what do you have? Because this is I forgot which translation I have, but
so, and you will be there to me a helper and supporter in my old age, on which account I mainly brought you up, and you will thereby procure me God for my comforter instead of yourself. So the idea is that Isaac, having gone to God as this righteous sacrifice, is now going to intercede for his father as well. And that there's going to be a communion that's going to continue on, where somehow in being with God, his intercession with him is going to be even more efficacious than it would be, down here on earth. Really interesting, I think, again, to another nail for Marcion. The idea of the communion of the saints is a Jewish idea.
Right.
This isn't something, whether we're talking in Maccabees, whether we're talking as far as Josephus's reading of Abraham and Isaac. These are all Jews. These are all Jewish ideas. It's not some sort of later different Christian development, which you have, in Christianity and Christian theology is the growth and the outworking of what's already here and present.
Yeah, it's a great point that on our last episode with Isaac Paley came on and shared Aramaic Targumim traditions and readings that went back to early times, maybe not first centuries, although some did, and how there was such a confluence within Judaism of ideas that you see then in the New Testament and later Christian development, that you cannot get away from the Jewishness of the thought world of the New Testament. If you haven't watched that episode, folks, definitely check that out, because Isaac shared some fascinating Targum passages that are very similar to what you're sharing here with us on Josephus, this milieu out of which later doctrines grow. And it goes against the popular misconception that you had this pure Jewish New Testament world that then immediately Constantine came in, or the Council of Nicaea, or somebody came in and turned it all Gentile. And so that gives rise to these later, like, modern Hebrew roots movements that are trying to get back to the real gospel, the real religion of Jesus. And you have to, it's an overreaction. It's like the opposite of Marcion's reaction. And it becomes anything not immediately found in Judaism is suspect and Gentile, and that's the Greek ideas that were added. And
Yeah.
man, finding balance is just hard. It's hard for people to have that balance. Well, that's one of the things I appreciate about you is I think you are a very balanced Catholic voice, and appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have a great fortune of learning, a great deal from all kinds of Protestants. Which I mean, I still do. We still, we're at my house right now. We have our little C.S. Lewis group. We do it every Tuesday, and it's still, and I don't hide it at all. I'm still, a disciple, of his. Even though obviously he's technically a Protestant, he's probably the worst Protestant in the world in the sense of when it comes to the distinctiveness of kind of holding to Protestant doctrines, whatever. But it's true. I'm fortunate to learn a great deal from from Protestants like Lewis, like Wright, like McGrath, who themselves are always drawing on Catholic resources as well. And so the good things that I've learned from folks like that are hopefully reflected.
Yeah, well, it's needed. It's important. Protestants should be reading Catholics. Catholics should be reading Protestants. I'm not going to lie. I'm not one of these. I'm not an embarrassed Protestant. I think we do have something to offer. And I think the names of people you mentioned are great examples. Just as your work, I would commend to people, and you being Catholic, Scott Hahn's work, I would commend to people, him being Catholic. We need to be listening to each other. So hopefully viewers are, and are understanding the necessity. Even we just finished Judaism January here at Disciple Dojo, having a non-Christian Jewish voice, having Rabbi Beth Lieberman on and listening to her perspective and other non-Jesus following Jewish voices. I think it's super important. And I think we make the mistake. I had commenters being like, what's happening? Is Disciple Dojo going leftist? Because we had her on talking about the gender sensitive edition of the JPS that just came out. And I just want, folks, you can talk to people without agreeing with them. And you can agree with people without agreeing with everything that they say. Hopefully people are finding that modeled in our discussions. We've gone, oh man, we're almost at 2.5 hours. So I'm probably cut this into 2 episodes.
Oh man, that's great. I love it.
I think folks will be fine with that. But we need to have you back on, man. I'd love to be in your C.S. Lewis group. I'm not going to lie. That would be finding people that read Lewis.
Yeah,
is hard.
My wife makes food for everybody. Got a bunch of hot sauce here.
Lee, you need to be
sauce.
You need to be in. Y'all just need to move to Charlotte.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh man, yeah. We have a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome. I need to find that here. Dojo viewers, let me know if you're interested. Especially if you're in the Carolinas.
Yeah,
I would love to find somebody
We just started making food and then just saying, hey, if you want to come eat, come on over. And we've been doing this.
Have you seen the video I've done? I don't think you would have, but a theology of shared meals.
No, I haven't. You sent me, I think, one that was based on Israel, which was really good.
This one is, I got invited to speak at a singles conference last year in Tulsa. And my opening talk was on the biblical theology of food. I'm on a crusade to make churches recapture eating together. Not a wafer and not a thimble of Welch's grape juice like us Methodists do. And a pinch of pita bread, but sitting down and eating together.
The agape feast.
Yes, it needs to happen. So yeah, I'll shoot you the link on that because then I had to back that up scripturally. But the more work I did, I am actually more convinced than even when I started that it is a biblical mandate that Christians should be eating together, and we don't. And so I'm glad to hear you guys do. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, brother, I love and appreciate you and your work, what you're doing, man. Thanks for spending a couple hours here. We're gonna have you back on because I want to talk. I do want to do a C.S. Lewis episode.
Yeah.
And I'm also interested in what questions viewers might have after this on other things that we can chat about. I'm trying to figure out how would we do an episode that does go into disagreement, like Protestant Catholic disagreement, without it being polemical.
Yeah, why don't you ask the viewers? Because I think I mean they're smart. Usually, I find that with my students. Usually, my students they know
some of them, most of them,
they'll know the answer before I can even get the words out of my mouth. So I think, well, you go and ask them and see what they think, because it's good. You can you know, I think just giving kind of multiple sides on like, hey, here's a question, and you know, what's one person's view, what's another person's view. I think you can get in all kinds of stuff like that. And I think what's great is that, I mean, it's frankly, it's really easy doing this with a Wesleyan, because Wesley is himself. I mean, I have a lot of admiration for Wesley.
I was going to ask how much work you've done with Wesley, because when I read Luther, I don't relate to Luther very much. In fact, I rarely relate to Luther.
No, I relate to Wesley a lot more. There's so much good stuff. I mean, as far as, you know, what Wesley is in some ways kind of like a C.S. Lewis figure. They're different in disposition, obviously.
Right.
The way that you know, the early and medieval church have such, you know, significant place for their own theology. And trying to hold to, you know, what Christians have held to at all times, and if it means leaving certain parts of the Reformation tradition behind, that's fine. Probably, you know, it's funny because I give this example sometimes when I'm working, you know, when I'm talking about the Catholic priesthood, and I talk about, you know, people who were Protestants who my sense is probably had a call to, you know, to celibacy in the way that, you know, that you know, Christ and St. Paul and others do. And I talk about, you know, with Wesley, and you know, obviously him doing all the ministry that he did, how fruitful that was, and then, you know, later on in life,
how bad his marriage was.
It's like, oh, I guess they'll get married, and then that ends up just being an absolute disaster. And he's I think an example. I mean, in some ways, you know, if you think of the folks I work with, you know, the Dominicans or the Jesuits, I mean, Wesley is somebody who is, I mean, they're absolutely cut from the same cloth as far as just being completely, you know, living this fully apostolic life, and I think he's a great example of it. If you're doing that in this particular way and you have that particular call, then to try to, you know, be married and have a family at the same time, if this is your call, it's going to be very, very difficult. And I think you see that illustrated in his life too. And so, anyway, I think, you know, it's really easy talking to, you know, Wesleyan about this, because I mean, really, all of the you have agreement, I think, from a Catholic and Wesleyan standpoint on so many foundational kind of fundamental principles. And when you have disagreement, it's almost always on point of emphasis, which is, I think, is great. It's really makes it really fun to have conversation. Really easy, I think, from folks to learn from each other as well.
Yeah. Well, certainly, you know, his Catholic Spirit sermon is one of my favorites, and I've done a video here on what is the Catholic Spirit, and that it's not the Roman Catholic Spirit, obviously, but just the universality, and do we agree on the essentials? And of course, you know, Wesley had thoughts on popery, and thought, you know, he wasn't Catholic, and
popery.
You know, he would take it to his Catholic friends and say, "Hey, here's where I think you're wrong." But even within that, there even though that's during a time when polemics was the thing to do, you would still see, I still see, at least in him, this understanding of the Church universal is bigger than just the Methodist movement, and you know, it can be found among the Moravians, even among Catholics and Orthodox. Yeah, that's what I try to emulate.
He has a document. I used to send it out to students called I think it's called A Letter to a Roman Catholic, which I'm sure you've come across at some point. And yeah, I think it's really interesting ecumenical stuff. I mean, you kind of have I don't know, sort of like a proto-ecumenical, movement that's there, even if there's still, sharp edges at times. There's so much common ground. I think, mutual appreciation that you see in somebody like Wesley, which is, I think is great.
Yeah, he's always been the most formative of my church history influences, for sure. Wesley, William Wilberforce, C.S. Lewis, Christopher Wright. It's kind of a short list of people that I'm like.
I got in trouble at Regent because I wasn't trying to get in trouble. I got myself into trouble, but because Wilberforce is a big guy for me too, and I wrote a paper on the question of why William Wilberforce's kids all became Catholic. And one of them becomes an Anglican bishop, so he doesn't go the full way, but the rest of his kids all become Catholic. Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to spice things up too much for you, but I ended up doing some work in a presentation at a conference on this one time. And for me, as somebody who was an evangelical who was, like running away from Catholic things unsuccessful, it did not help me to run away from Catholic things any more successfully. The fact that, one of my heroes, had so many things that were going in that direction. But anyway, can save that for another time.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for the ministry that you're doing and the folks that you're reaching with this. I think it's fantastic. It's the kind of stuff where, people like me really rely on the hard work that you do and just helping to connect with folks, because my head's in a book all day. and so
I will keep pointing folks to your work, and in particular the work you've done for Ignatius, and you guys keep pointing folks to Disciple Dojo, and
absolutely.
We'll both get better as a result. All right, my man. Well, take care. Tell your wife I'm looking forward to meeting her at some point, and hopefully I can get out there one day and join y'all's C.S. Lewis group.
I love it, man. It'd be fantastic.
So much fun. So I'm so appreciative for Matthew and his ministry. The fact that he can come on and just spend a couple of hours talking on a Friday afternoon, which is when we're filming this, it means the world to me. So if you haven't already, get a copy of the Ignatius Study Bible and read he and Leanne's notes in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. They are just excellent. Other resources that we mentioned in this discussion, I will put links to in the video description below. So be sure you tap on that and check it out. And Dojo viewers, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching and supporting this channel as we continue to grow. If you haven't already subscribed, we would love for you to do so. But that'll do it for this episode. We'll see you back here next time at Disciple Dojo. As always, keep training.